great to be joined by my panellists, Leisa Goddard from Adoni Media and Liberal MP Keith Wallahan representing Menzies. Great to have you both with me. National Senator Bridget McKenzie made some explosive statements to Sky News this morning about the ongoing Senate inquiry into the Qatar Airways decision. I'll start with what she said about Transport Minister Catherine King and whether she should front the inquiry.
I hope Minister King will take up the kind invitation of the committee to come and explain her decision, because...
But you can't compel her because she's a member of the lower house.
No, but there is precedence for members of the House of Representatives fronting up to Senate inquiries and helping us with the questions that the committee may have.
Keith, should Catherine King front up?
I think she should. Labor in opposition and even after they were elected talked a lot about transparency and integrity as a sword, but it's gone missing when they seek to use it as a shield. I think the decent thing to do is to come into this inquiry and answer the questions. And I'll give you an example. For my electorate, 70% of the electorate are first or second generation migrants. Many migrants have to travel overseas as a necessity to care for relatives. So it's not a luxury. And if there was any decisions made that increased the cost of that, then we need to have those questions answered.
Yeah, it's a real cost of living question, as well as, it could be a lifeline for a struggling tourism industry. Leisa, she also said Alan Joyce should be threatened with jail time if he doesn't go to the inquiry. Take a look.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not something the Senate does lightly or regularly, but that is the end penalty. You can be held in contempt and there can be either fines or jail terms attached to that finding of contempt.
You'd think he'd show up, obviously.
Well, you'd hope so.
Leisa, it seems like a bit of a stretch to me, but what do you make of that?
Yeah, look, I think it shows the level of frustration that they're feeling. They're just not getting any of the answers that they want. And look, Bridget McKenzie is no stranger. She's had to front up and give evidence or speak to public hearings or Senate hearings before, so she knows that what they're in for when they get there. It's not beyond the ask to expect that Catherine King would go in there and answer the questions that her department heads wouldn't answer when they were put through questions. But the fact that Alan Joyce he's left Qantas now. The average Australian, I think, is really looking at that brand and just thinking it is not the airline that we once all loved, that we all proudly had faith in. I've had a number of people that I know who have had flights delayed and missed, and it's a common conversation that you have in the business world about how badly Qantas is performing. So I think he owes it to the brand that he walked away with, $125 million in his pocket and counting. I think he owes it to the brand to come back here and face those questions.
For that price, you can do a little overtime. Two senior academics have written in The Australian today that the Northern Territory intervention was a failure and that it's proof we need an Indigenous voice to Parliament in the Constitution. They've added that the HIV strategy adopted by this country shows how the voice needs to be done. Now, look, it's no surprise to me that one of the architects of the HIV response thinks that his work is a model for how all things should be done. Though, to be fair, the relative success of that policy speaks volumes. But Keith, isn't the point here that they didn't have to permanently change the Constitution and the rights of people in our democracy to stop HIV?
I think that's exactly the point, Amanda. When I read that article and I got to the second half, I said he's undermined his point. Of course, listening to people who are affected by policies leads to better outcomes. No one disagrees with that. But if the answer to that is it can only be achieved by a new chapter in the Constitution, well, then we have much bigger problems in our democracy. Our job as parliamentarians is to listen to people in all areas of public policy. And we keep asking the questions of the government, who and what are you not listening to now? Like, listen to people now. That's your job.
Quite right. Leisa, what's your take on this?
Yeah, Keith, I think you're right. And Amanda, that's what hits me, that we've had people from with Indigenous heritage in Parliament. We have had up-dean people who are in there lobbying or being a voice for the Indigenous community. And decades and decades and decades on, we're now at this point where we're being pressured into whether you say yes or no to a voice. I think put that argument aside. The question that we need to ask is, where has all of the money gone? I think that's the really interesting question from my perspective. And the other one that really gets me, and again, put your voice yes or no aside, is if there are proven programs that are working. So say here, the Mater Hospital here in Queensland had a successful program where it worked with 2 local communities and managed to reduce the number of babies that were being born preterm. If that works and it's proven to work here in Brisbane, why has it not been rolled out nationally? And why do we need a voice for those sorts of programs to suddenly be rolled out nationally? I just think there's a failure there in who we've had consulting to the government.
Be good to have some accountability for the money that's already on the table, the programs that have already been funded, and for politicians to be able to engage with, well, is this or isn't this working and should we be doing more of it? Education Minister Jason Clare was on Sky News this morning talking about new efforts to bring down the cost of childcare. He narrowed in on individual providers charging too much. Check this out.
The idea of naming and shaming providers that are just charging, over-the-top fees makes a lot of sense to me. If people were taking advantage of this just to jack up fees out of proportion with what's happening in the economy, then there should be pressure placed on them. And here's a recommendation that does that.
Leisa, in 2022, an Australian couple on average wages with 2 kids in childcare 5 days a week spent 16% of net household income on their net childcare costs. The OECD average comparison is 9%. Clearly the problem isn't just a few bad apples. How much of a role does the bureaucracy and regulation and the red tape around childcare mean here?
Look, I think it's a merry-go-round, right? So you see that the amount of money people are being given, or the prices go up in relation to what subsidies are being given. So the government does have a responsibility there, I think, to get in and try and control that if people are proving to gouge the system, which I think that's what it appears is happening. But go back to mum and dad. So you've got mum and dad both working to try to, 16% of the net income for the household, plus what they're putting out in rent and mortgage, plus their cost of living pressures right now. They can't afford these prices to keep going up, because what happens is somebody has to give up work, and ultimately that generally is the woman. So you're going to see a hit on the productivity of this country as well. So I know we've had this conversation on camera and off camera, but it's time to also look beyond, I think, the official childcare system. Let's look at, if your parents are there looking after your children, what's the tax break that you can get for that? What about if the other grandparents are involved? What's the tax break there? I think we need to look beyond. It's an essential service. We need to look beyond just what is in place at the moment.
Oh, I could talk about this all night with the both of you. Thank you so much for your contributions on the panel, Keith Wallahan and Leisa Goddard.